Hey, this is Alec. Welcome to Whitewell Comics. So I've noticed a bit of a trend lately on YouTube with people doing their top 50 favorite comic lists. And if there's one thing I am, it is a trend follower and not a trendsetter. So I decided to also do my own list of top favorite 50 comics. Um, they are strictly my favorite comics that I own. They aren't necessarily in order of value, although I did take value into account somewhat due to the fact that if I ever were to get rid of some of them, the less valuable ones would be reobtainable more easily. Although I guess I probably wouldn't get rid of them because they're my favorite. So maybe I should reevaluate my list. Uh, I think I feel pretty comfortable with it. Before we begin, I want to give two quick shout outs. One is to a buddy of mine named Mike, who is part of a podcast called First Issue Club. I've linked them in the description of a couple of my videos before, but I've never given them a proper shout out, I don't believe. I'll link them in the description again. It's a great podcast. They just review number one issues that come out each week. It's really great for new comic readers. It's really great for old comic readers. It's funny, and they give great reviews as well. So I urge you to check them out. And to segue into my next shout out, he recently asked me if I was ever going to run out of metal shirts to wear, which I haven't yet, but I probably will. And the metal shirt I'm wearing today is from another friend's band. They're called Sky Tigers. They're a great local band to my area. Thrashy, hardcorey, just high energy rock and roll. And I'll put their Bandcamp in my description as well. If you like that type of music, I urge you to check them out. They're really great. But other than that, without further ado, my top favorite 50 comics. Start out with number 50. Death Talks About Life. I know this is a free comic and a bit of a throwaway, but I've had it in my collection forever, and I find it not only really amusing, but really poignant that DC and Vertigo decided to do something like this. If you don't know what it is a giveaway comic about safe sex practices, and I thought it was really interesting the way they did it with the character Death. So, just a bit of a fan favorite here, and you'll see why a bit later in the list. Number 49, Alpha Flight number 1. If you follow my channel, you know that I'm a big fan of Alpha Flight. Great book, great cover, great team. John Byrne, love it. Number 48, recent acquisition. Uncanny X-Men 213. This is really on my list strictly for the cover. All-time great Wolverine versus Sabretooth fight cover. Really cool. Number 47, the Mike Allred issue of Solo. I thought this series was just awesome. DC letting artists and creators just do pretty much whatever they want, and as you can see, this is signed and personalized by Mike Allred, who is a delight. If you haven't checked this out, there's an omnibus of it, which actually conveniently is right here, which also has a Mike Allred cover. So check that out if you have not. Superman number 75, Death of Superman. Just a historic piece of comic history. I know there's literally millions of these out there, but very fond of having it. Number 45, Uncanny X-Men 120, another Alpha Flight book, first appearance of Alpha Flight. Yeah, Alpha Flight. I'm a fan. 44, another recent acquisition, Devil Dinosaur number 1. As I said in my other video, I love devils, I love dinosaurs, I love Kirby. Just a really cool book with an awesome cover with a rad dinosaur on it. What's not to like? Number 43, Night Nurse #1. I bought this years ago, actually, on my drive down to college. And my dad and I stopped at Jane Silent Bob's Secret Stash in Red Bank, New Jersey, in the old location. I'll tell you how many years ago that was. And they had it up on the wall, and it was, I don't know, 10, 15 bucks. Not in the best shape, but in decent shape, and turned out to be a bit of a hot book lately, and I think it's a really amusing representation of the time and the depiction of women in comics, which has gotten a lot better, thankfully. #42, Batman Sword of Azrael #1. It's another bit of a nostalgia pick. I really like the character of Azrael. I really love this cover, Quesada cover. It was really a huge deal when it came out, right around the time of, obviously the time Batman got his back broken and Jean-Paul Valley became Batman. Spoilers for 90s Batman, if you haven't read it. 41, Bloodshot #1. Barry Windsor Smith cover, chromium cover, Valiant, 90s, all stuff that I just love. Number 40, Solar, Man of the Atom #1. Another great Barry Windsor Smith cover, 90s. It's not to love. 39, Uncanny X-Men 244, first appearance of Jubilee. I'm actually a really big Jubilee fan from Generation X mostly. I think she's a cool character that they've done some weird stuff with, but still a fan. Number 38, Vision #1. If you haven't read this series, I can't recommend it highly enough. Even if you're not a Marvel fan or a Vision fan, it stands on its own really well, and it is just, I don't know, I can't say enough good things about it, so I won't try. Just check it out. Next up, Uncanny X-Men, or rather X-Men #109, first appearance of Vindicator. Again, if you watch my Alpha Flight video, you know how much I enjoy this book and this series of stories. So if you haven't checked it out, do so. 36, X-Force 116. One of my favorite covers in my collection. Another Mike Allred book. Big fan of the Ecstatic series, and this is the start of it. Number 35, Four Kids Walk into a Bank #4. The One Kid Walks into a Bank Ghost variant. This is really hard to find for some reason. I don't know if they just didn't print a lot of them or if people didn't notice, but it is rarely on eBay that I have seen. A buddy of mine, Joe, who may do some videos with me in the future, found it at a local shop on the counter or on the shelf, and knew how much I liked the series, so he was kind enough to pass it along to me. Another really cool, great series. I am a big fan, or was a big fan, of Black Mask Comics. They ran into some sort of legal trouble and kind of messed up their publishing schedule, and it kind of turned some things around, but they still put out some great books. We Can Never Go Home, Space Riders, Four Kids Walk into a Bank, Young Terrorists, even though that was one of the ones that really suffered from publishing schedule. But if you haven't checked out any of their books, check out some of those. 34, Descender number 1. Another series I really can't say enough great things about. Jeff Lemire, Justin Nguyen. Art's beautiful. The writing is also beautiful, and really comes together to make something special, I think. 43, Criminal number 1. I am a huge fan of the series that Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips do, and this was one of their very early ones that brought me into their world. Kill or Be Killed, the most recent one, I think is probably their best for my money, but Criminal is always a classic. 32, Hawkeye number 11. I thought about putting Hawkeye number 1 on the list, but decided to put this issue on instead because it is my favorite single issue from the series, and I think it is a better representation of it for me. It's just an incredibly fun and interesting read. The series is incredible, but this one is a standout for me. Pizza Dog. 31, X Factor number 6. First appearance of Apocalypse. Not much else to say about that. Just a classic first appearance of a really great X-villain. So there are a few books on this list that are currently out at grading. So I don't have them physically here to show you, but I'll put it here. Saga number 1. I actually really lost steam on this series, but the beginning of it was great, and really happy to still have this comic in my collection, and should be back in the next couple days actually, so I'll do a video of that unboxing to see what the grade is. Speaking of grades, number 29, Runaways number 1. Early Brian K. Vaughan. It's 2 Brian K. Vaughns in a row actually. Really liked this first run of this series, and got it graded a 9.8, which was pretty happy with that. Number 28, my favorite cover of all time, Generation X number 1, which I recently got a second copy of, so I'm starting my collection to line my walls with that. If you haven't watched my video on my top 10 favorite covers, I talk a lot about that there, so I won't talk a lot about it here, but it is my favorite cover of all time. It's chromium, it is 90s, and it's got Jubilee on it. Number 27, Uncanny X-Men 248. It's the first Jim Lee on X-Men book, which I also have the second print of, so I'm kind of cheating by putting an extra book on my list, but really it's this copy that counts. Another book that's out at grading that I'll put here, Amazing Spider-Man 194, first appearance of Black Cat. That is in a separate order from the saga, so that's going to be a bit longer to come back. Be sure to share the grade with all of you when it comes back. 25, NYX number 3. Big fan of Joshua Middleton, and obviously first appearance of X-23, which is a big deal nowadays. Not the best grade. Curious if I cracked it and pressed it if it would be better, but not really about that life that much. Just happy to have it graded, and really cool book. Next, another recent acquisition book, Ghost Rider number 2, first appearance of Damon Hellstrom. Awesome cover, really super 70s, super biker life. I'm a wimp and I wouldn't get on a bike because I'm a coward. but I think they're really cool, and I think this cover is really cool. 23, Ryan #1, my favorite Valiant character, my favorite Valiant book, one of my favorite Valiant covers, and yeah, it's awesome. Look at it. 22, G.I. Joe #1, also at grading. I was a huge G.I. Joe fan as a kid. It ruled my life. Huge fan of the action figures, huge fan of the comic, Larry Hama. Love this book. 21, yet another book that's out at grading. Amazing Spider-Man 252, classic early black suit Spider-Man book, tied with Marvel Spotlight something else. But I love this cover way more than that cover, so this is the book for me. 20, Batman Adventures 12, first appearance of Harley Quinn. Kind of a funny story about how I got this. I was selling some stuff at a local comic shop, and they just had this kind of sitting out, unbagged, unboarded on a table in the room that they were looking at my items with. And I pointed at it and said, oh, what's the deal with the Batman Adventures 12? And the guy was like, oh, it's someone else. He's selling this big Batman collection, and it's just all loose books, and that was in the middle of it. I said, oh, well, can we work out a trade for what I'm selling? And he said, well, we don't actually own it yet because they left, and we're waiting for them to come back. So we don't actually know if they want to take our offer. So I had to hang out in the shop for about another hour waiting for these other people to come back. But they did end up selling it and worked out a deal and got this as well as some cash for what I was selling. So pretty happy. I think Harley Quinn, much like another character I'm about to talk about, is really oversaturated right now. But big fan of the Bruce Timm version of Harley Quinn, so happy to own this book. Speaking of which, my next book, number 19, New Mutants 98, first appearance of Deadpool, Gideon, and the fake Domino. Deadpool is another character that I think is just extremely oversaturated right now. He is definitely a fun character. The movie was funny and amusing, but it is over the top. But this was a huge book for me growing up, and still really excited to have it in my collection. Don't mean to sound like a grump about it, but I'm a little grumpy about it. Next book is yet another book that is out for grading, and yet another book that my buddy Joe gave to me. It is Why the Last Man #1, and yet another Brian K. Vaughan book. Really like this series. I haven't read it in a while, but I've heard some friends say that they've reread it recently and found it to be not as good as they remember, but I'll have to go back and reread it because I do own all the hardcovers. So I'll get back to you on that one. Number 17, Amazing Spider-Man #39. Early Green Goblin appearance. Classic John Romita Sr. cover. It is one of the older Amazing Spider-Man books I own. Not in tremendous shape, but happy to own it in any condition. Number 16, Miss Marvel #1, Carol Danvers version. Another recent acquisition. In fact, part of a haul I got the other day, along with a couple other books on this list. A great Bronze Age book. Really happy to have it. Number 14, Miss Marvel #1, Kamala Khan version. I'm a huge fan of Kamala Khan. I think she is a really great representation of how to portray minorities in comics. I'm not going to get into Comicsgate right now, but I think that it is important to have diversity in comics. I'll say that much. And she is a shining example of diversity in comics. And really cool book to own. Next up, Rye number 0. Again, my favorite Valiant character. One of my favorite covers of all time. I think it's probably one of the best covers of all time. I love minimalism, and this just really pops. Also, first appearance of Bloodshot as Rye, which I don't know if that's going to come into play in the movies, but still, regardless, super cool book to have. Number 13, Infinity Gauntlet number 1. One of my favorite miniseries of all time. One of the best Marvel stories of the 90s or maybe any other era, but was a huge fan of this as a kid. Huge fan of it now. Great cover, great book. Number 12, you guessed it, another book at grading. New Mutants 87. This one should be coming back with the Saga number 1. First appearance of Cable. I was a big fan of Wizard magazine as a kid, and this was just hyped to just beyond belief back then. So I didn't own it until years later, but very happy to have it now. Number 11, Uncanny X-Men 141, Days of Future Past Part 1. I mean, what can you say about this book? It is just quintessential X-Men, quintessential Marvel, all-time great cover. Yeah, I mean, if you got anything bad to say about it, I'd be surprised, but I respect your opinion. It's wrong. This book's great. And finally, my top 10. Number 10, Incredible Hulk 180, first cameo appearance of Wolverine. You know, there's a lot of argument about first appearances and what constitutes a first appearance versus a cameo appearance and what is the book to get for that specific character. I'm thinking about doing a video on that specifically, so I won't talk about it too much here, but early Wolverine appearance, super cool. Number 9, the last book on this list that is currently at grading. Fantastic Four 49. First full appearance of Galactus and Silver Surfer. I think just all-time great Kirby cover. Colors on it, the composition of it, the excitement of it. It is quintessential Kirby and really an important book for some character appearances as well, if you've heard of those guys. I'm sure you have. Number 8 on my list, Fables number 1. One of my favorite series ever. Super creative, gorgeous art, compelling story. Ran a little long in my opinion, but I will forgive it because I didn't want it to end at the same time. That doesn't make any sense. I'm contradicting myself, so I'll move on. Fables. Number 7. Sandman number 8. First appearance of Death. Another all-time favorite series. I know that's a really unpopular opinion because people really hate Sandman. In all seriousness, everyone loves Sandman. How could you not? It's amazing. And speaking of Sandman, number 6, Sandman number 1. yeah, Sandman #1. I'll just let you look at it for a minute. #5, my favorite X-Men book of all time, my favorite X-Man of all time, or X-character, rather. X-Men, Uncanny X-Men 266, first appearance of Gambit. I really love Gambit. Mostly, honestly, from the cartoon from the 90s, as I think many people of my age do. But this is a book that I had to have as a kid, so I saved up and bought a copy, and I've had it forever, and I got it graded, and it is one of my favorites. I would go so far as to say my #5 favorite. #4, Amazing Spider-Man 300. First appearance of Venom, in case you didn't know. I'm sure you did. This was another book that, as a kid, just really called to me. And the comic shop I went to at the time had a big wall of books like many comics shops do, and he had this rotating 20% off sticker that he would put on random books. And for his younger customers on their birthdays, he would let them pick which book had the 20% off sticker. And I immediately picked this without having to think. Unfortunately, it has a little crease on the back, which is why it's an 8.5, but I had to get it graded because it is personally important to me. And I can't afford a better copy because it is bananas right now how much this book is going for. #3 is a book that I bought off the shelf, thankfully, because it is also crazy how much it goes for. Walking Dead #1. Was shocked that this came back at 9.8, pleasantly surprised, obviously. Another book that I've really lost steam on, I've stopped reading quite a while ago, but the first couple arcs were really great, and it's I think one of the, if not the biggest modern Grail books to own for a lot of people, and I'm still thrilled to have it in my collection, even though I've kind of fallen off the series, but I still love it, even though I'm not hot on the book anymore. #2 is a book I actually just won on eBay last night. I'm going to leave it a mystery because I'm going to do an unboxing of it when it comes in. So I'm going to put a big question mark here. Boop, boop. And you'll find out soon enough. But it is probably my #1 Grail of all time. Within reason. Like, I'm not counting like Amazing Spider-Man 1 or Amazing Fantasy 15 or books that are well out of my personal budget. But, I mean, who knows? Maybe one day I might win the lottery. That's what we all assume, right? And my #1 book of all time, Strangers in Paradise #1. It's my favorite series of all time. Took me a long time to track down a nice copy of this first printing of the first miniseries. I was really hoping it would come back a 9.8, but it's got one little spine tick right there that I think dropped it down. Still really happy with the grade, still really happy to own it. I am definitely going to do a video on the series at some point because I am just a huge gushing fan of it. And so you'll find out more about that later. So that is my top 50 comics of all time. Hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks for sticking around for all 50. Let me know what some of your top 50 are, or at least your top 10 in the comments below. Hope you come back. Never turn your back to the ocean. Thanks for watching.